just remember, this is a place of discussion, not a place of a lecture. The lecture is kind of a strange thing. The topic tonight is Lost New Haven, and the word lost has an enormous weight to it, a provenance to it, maybe a judgment to it, that what is lost should not have gone, that it should have never been departed, that it's sad and it's bad. Well, this talk takes an approach which is not the typical historic preservationist approach. It's an approach that says that there are only two forces in architecture, only two immutable, unchanging, universal forces in architecture. The first, of course, is gravity. If we weren't defeating gravity, this would be crashing on our heads or be very cold around us. So gravity is an important thing to deal with. The second, unknown, undealt with, often just ignored by architects, is history, the passage of time, the fact that no matter what happens, there's past, present, and future, and we can't control it, and we can't control gravity. We can adapt to it, but we really can't do those things. Now that's one principle that I would like you to take away, that basically there are two forces in architecture. The second is harder for architects and maybe harder for the human being that is exposed to media and judgment every day like we are. And that is the simple fact that history is not a style. History is not a style. History is time. It's the passage of time. It's the fact that some things have already happened, some things are gone, some things are happening now, some things will happen in the future, and some things will exist in the future that were already existing in the past. It's a continuum. It's not a style. That's not the way we've been brought up. We've been brought up to think that all these images from all these people, and I want to thank all of them, but not by name, but you can all read the names up there of these people, have dedicated their lives to essentially documenting what has existed, and many of them right here are dedicating their lives to creating new futures in buildings. So presence in the past, presence now, presence in the future is part of all of these people from a variety of different backgrounds, all contributed art for tonight's show. It's a dozen sources. So the seminal fact is that buildings are built. Obviously, we're in one now. Buildings are built, but buildings are also torn down. And I'm going to show you a few images where these are virtually, they're not anonymous. Somebody knows who they are. Many of us didn't know who they are, but these buildings are no longer with us. They're incredibly beautiful things. I mean, whoever saw that before? That's an amazing whatever it is. This building is incredible because it started and then it had stuff and made stuff, new got added, more. This is a physical embodiment of the passage of time that is now gone. That history is forever gone, left, and lost. This building evidences history in a more informal way, but obviously there's the center hall, there's the entry, maybe that was added, maybe that was added, that was definitely added, and that was added, and any number of things were done because time affects every building and is evidenced in every building. And this is a thing that we don't know what the hell it is. We basically said, is that Princeton? If anybody knows that, tell me after the slideshow. These are buildings that we don't know what they are, but they're gone. They're not here. Neighborhoods are gone. This is obviously Fairhaven. This is obviously a place which is greatly the same and greatly changed. So neighborhoods change. They come, they go. The coming and going happens. Buildings exist, they cease to exist. History always exists. Gravity always exists. The realities of our lives exist independent of our creations and our perceptions and our judgments. Things happen that are without judgment. History, you can't hear me? Are you good? Okay. Well, anyway, so history is something that we grapple with because we know we can't control it. We know we want to deal with it. It's just like gravity. We want to make a building that resists the forces of gravity. We also want to lead our lives in a way where we can control history. Well, people probably forget that Henry Ford in 1936 took the building that was for Noah Webster and moved it to Dearborn, Michigan, from the corner of Grove and Temple Streets, I think, in 1936. And this building was history, and it was moved by Ford because it was history. So it was the embodiment of a great man, Noah Webster, and it went away. That movement of history, that removal of something, is also true of the embodiment of the way we lived and worked, survived and died for generations way, way, way long ago. I was asked to read the names on the green of the people who died from New Haven in World War I. And it occurred to me 3 weeks ago, there wasn't a single person in the audience that knew any of the people there, let alone their dogs. So basically, this is gone forever. In the audience is a somewhat genius human being called Herb Newman. And Herb Newman is one of the great architects in America who also understands what it's like to deal with history. His spearheading, along with a lot of other great people of the 9th Square Project in New Haven, thought about new stuff, sure, but he also thought about the worth and value and tangible reality of the existing as manifesting history, to the point where his building recreated the 9 squares in New Haven. And for those that don't know, this is this theocracy of 9 equal squares, with the center one being the green, which is actually and factually not sized to accept 60,000 mortals up to the heavens in the rapture, but it's a really good story. And around 2 creeks, and that's why we're not really north, south, east, west. We're sort of at the juncture of these 2 creeks. But here is a building built 25 or 30 years ago, and here is something done in 1641. One informs the other. One should allude to the other. But in general, we, humans, are not really good at the passage of time. We don't like growing older. We sort of fret about wasting time. And we also aren't good as architects, because in this building, which is the Perry World Center at the University of Pennsylvania, had an 1851 900 square foot cottage designed by Sam Sloan. And this 19,000 square foot bent stone thing that was added onto it by 1,100 architects out of, that's the name, not, there weren't 1,100 architects, it's called 1,100 architects that were out of New York City, I think. And they made this very large thing. And to me, the building itself tries to juxtapose new and old. What it also is a collision. It basically says there's no resolution, there's only contrast. And you can make a case that this incredibly beautiful building that was maligned at the time and has got obviously issues of brutalism, love it or hate it, that ended up over 50 years getting filled like a sack with different stuff, to the point where an entire new building, and there's somebody here who knows a lot about that, with an entire new building that essentially removed materials and freed up this art building to not be a singularity anymore, but to actually function with the Laureus Center, Rudolph Hall, and the Laureus Center, almost like a binary of new, taking care of business, and old, taking care of business, but also manifesting the art of the original creator, and thus the change of the name to the original creator, Paul Rudolph. But the bottom line is this. The bottom line is all of these dealings with time are not unlike this actor who was hired to portray an architect to market Botox to men. Because the reality is, wrinkles are bad, architects control details, so if you're an architect and you want to control your own details, you use Botox so you don't look like an old architect like me. So we do that, and we also react in a way, and this is the traditional historic preservationist way, we try to create history. We try to actually manifest something which is gone. Well, this is the 1903 McKim Mead and White Penn Station in New York City. And this building is an incredibly beautiful building. Parts of it are based in the Baths of Caracalla. It took over this entire block of New York, this incredible thing. And basically what happened to it was it outlived its usefulness as a profit generator. So another block was taken over, and on that block they got Madison Square Garden, a mid-rise office building, and then the basement was ceremoniously given over to Penn Station. And the loss of this incredibly beautiful thing was the whole reason, many people think, why the historic preservation movement even happened. The disastrous loss of all of this great human effort was such an outrage to the sensibilities of creating beauty in the world that people said, we can't ever let this happen again. That is a good thing. Another group now, 2 years ago, the National Civic Arts Society, has said, well, we need to renovate this, obviously, and they've dedicated over $1 billion to renovate Penn Station, the state of New York has. Well, forget about renovating it. Let's just build a new one, but let's build a new one exactly like the old one, exactly like it. We'll just have escalators in it, and we'll deal with people with backpacks and Amtrak trains. The idea is that the replication of that says one very simple thing, and this has been wildly successful for them. They've spent millions of dollars and actually had enormous public recognition of their work as a really great institution, and I talked about this in DC last year. They have communicated to people that the past is something that should be worshipped and renovated and loved. It should be reproduced. I, however, have written and have said pretty clearly that the past is wonderful, but not all the great architects are dead. There are living architects. And the truth is, no matter what we do, we'll never make Penn Station great again. The reason why we have the president we have, I think, is because people want to create what they knew was good then. That's the spirit behind this. The spirit is that whatever is old has got to be better than whatever is new. And the truth of the matter is, new is not necessarily new, it's just what we're doing right now. And the Schermerhorn building in Nashville, Tennessee, thank you, Elizabeth Holt, for telling me where this was, actually is emblematic of the fact that there are now 5 schools of architecture, including Catholic University, Notre Dame, University of Colorado at Denver, and 2 others, that essentially are teaching historic preservation, not as historic preservation, they're teaching historic neoclassical design as the method of design. Just like modernism is taught by the vast majority of colleges in America as the method of design, those groups actually believe that if you design something which is not in a tradition that is documentable, certifiable, 2-dimensionally replicable, 3-dimensionally manifest, you are not making good buildings, you're making bad buildings. One, in fact, line is, there's never been a good building built in the 20th century. Well, that small fragment of the architectural world, and it is quite small, stands in contradistinction to the glacier of 100 years of the progress of high modernism since the advent of the 20th century, which has scraped clean diversity in the mother of the arts, in the most diverse and most enriching profession you could have, building a building out of all this stuff. There's been a die that many of us in school have been pushed through, which is the die of modernism. And the die of modernism has one central tenet, that the past is bad and what hasn't been yet is better. And that is what most architecture professes at the higher end now. And the truth of the matter is that it really is an extension of control. It is an extension of the fact that we humans want to manifest ourselves rather than the dead ones. We'd rather create us than to recreate something that's happened before us. That spirit of the worship of creativity was incredibly present in New Haven in the mid-20th century. I'm saying this to many people that already know this, but Mayor Lee, Dick Lee, recreated the landscape of New Haven after World War II because his brother was the head of HUD, Housing and Urban Development, and for about 20, 30 years, they got more dollars per person in New Haven for all the 20 or 30 years than in any other community in the country, and they clear-cut neighborhoods. They built tons of new things, and with the energy of the extremely beautiful creative forces of the Yale School of Architecture, they created a place in New Haven which is truly unique, I think, in the world. It is one of the places where a huge diversity of architecture just sort of happens. You have John Johannesson's school, the grad school, that had tons of regulated materials in it and had to be torn down. They promised to keep the bells, but they didn't. So, but this is an old one. This is a new old building that is no more, and perhaps the most powerful new old building that isn't anymore is the Colosseum, a place where below us, 10, 20 feet below this building, is of course water, because we're built on a swamp, and this is where the two creeks came together right here. The architect, a genius, a wonderful person, Kevin Roche, said, well, sure, let's just put the parking up here. So in putting the parking up top, they made these ramps, which were terrifying. I'm one of the few people that went on them. You could actually lock your wheel, and you just go, and you almost would be dead by the time you got here. And also the bathrooms, because this costs so much to make this really cool thing, the bathrooms were worse than any spec house in America. They were horrific bathrooms, and the place didn't work, and it went away. Well, those bad examples morphed into what I think is the better example. The idea of coexistence between the new and the old, and the cross-pollination, and the fact that there's vitality and not dogma. The fact that there is diversity. And that diversity now has actually gotten into the fact that modernism, high modernism, that used to be cutting-edge new, has become the subject of extreme historic preservation activity. And I've written about this, where essentially we've transmogrified history to personality. We've basically said that the personalities of Frank Lloyd Wright, of Le Corbusier, of Mies van der Rohe, these personalities are so pungent and strong and vital to our culture that they need to be preserved in the buildings they created. Even though these buildings they created are only 30, 40, 50 years old. And in New Haven, hundreds of millions of dollars have been spent by Yale and by the Knights of Columbus to stabilize and maintain very modern buildings that many people don't think of as anything sentimental. They think of it as kind of cool or awful. And in that effort, the New Haven Preservation Trust created this website, or started to create it 10 years ago. It's been up for about 5 years. If you haven't seen this website, it is actually a wonderful, simple, straight presence of visuals and history to show that there is a method of thinking in the mid-century called modernism that actually is, I think, an exciting way of looking at buildings, and actually should not be washed out with the baby in the bathwater. It basically should be known and preserved. But buildings do end. They end because they don't work. After a little bit of research, I basically figured out that that's where Beckton Hall is now, Yale. That these buildings went away because Beckton Hall was needed to study science, and in this observatory went away because we have crazy to study buildings when you're in the Northeast, where you've got lots of cloud cover and it's not so clear. The hospital, of course, keeps on changing, and these hospital buildings all went away, and they were huge and wonderful and civic and proud. And then I thought about you, Turner. I thought about this building that I discovered looking at a photograph. If you look to the left, you'll see a little connector, and you'll see this little building. Actually, this building here, you'll see this little building. And this is, we either think an operatory, because it's got an amphitheater that's well lit, or perhaps it is a place where people with influenza or someone go to get cured. But the idea that this cool, interesting, hybridized, centered, cranking, techno, ornamented thing was built and gone, and this is what remains of it. This is, to me, sad. Things should be remembered if they are destroyed. So in New Haven, because of this ethic of tear it down, build it up, tear it down, just like that great speech in the movie Field of Dreams of America keeps going forward and keeps going forward and keeps plowing down and building new, and baseball remains. So maybe it's baseball, gravity, and history, but still, it's gravity and history. That these things in New Haven have special meaning because we have a pungency of a long history approaching 400 years. We have this place that has got real realities in our lives every day, like the New Haven Green. And if you just go around the New Haven Green, you probably don't remember that the state of Connecticut had two capitals, one in New Haven and one in Hartford. And this was actually the state capitol building. And this was actually said to be the colleges at Yale. And I've shown this to many people. We have no idea what this actually is. It's not the churches, and whatever it is, it's there. It's obviously symbolic. But this building was here. It was here for not quite a century, but it was here, and it was beautiful amongst all the elms that are now all gone. And it was part of our lives in this town. And of course, we killed it. We killed it because it didn't have a function anymore. There was only one state capitol, not two. So we took that building away. Whole streetscapes have evolved. This is looking up Streeter Halls to the right. This is looking up the city of Elms. I think this maybe is Worcester Square, but you see the trolleys, you see the cars, you see the bollards. These parts of our city are gone because obviously stuff changes, which is fine. But it is sad. And all around the green, little buildings like this, an anonymous forgotten building that was on the green, Stillman and Clark, clothing, is gone forever, unremembered. And this church, we think, is on the green because it's got the fencing that's on the green. And I have, for the life of me, I have no idea what it is. Maybe somebody here does. Third, there you go. Now you know. Third Congregational Church.
1889,
First public library in Haven. See, come and you learn. This is good. And buildings like this, sitting right next to the brand new City Hall there on the left, they went away. The annex of the City Hall came, it went away. The building, an office building next to City Hall came, it went away. Now it's the first international or national financial center. Buildings around the green, started as banks, became other things. Were, I think, a hotel? Was that a hotel? It was something, but it was quite a wonderful mansard roof building. And it got buildings put around it. There it is there, and the buildings are put around it. And the hustle and bustle wore on, and then modernism happened, and the entire block gave way to the Chapel Square Mall. I think it was 1967, just taken away, with a center-focusing mall that ended up being actually homicidal, and so they changed that. But the truth of the matter is that all of this normal build it, tear it down, that's a pretty normal binary. Make, kill, that's a pretty normal, circle of life, kumbaya experience. The harder experience, the one which I would encourage you to think about, is the more complicated experience. The fact that things like this happen that we don't know happen, but took a lot of thought behind them even being created. So this is Orange Street, and this is Elm Street, Orange and Elm. This is the Webster Bank now. But what is that in the Webster Bank? Well, that was the original St. Thomas's. St. Thomas's Church was built in 1848 here as a comfort chapel for Trinity Church. It then got its own congregation, started its own financial and corporate reality, and never built the aspiring tower that you see here, but at the same time had a wonderful, august life, had parishioners, so many parishioners, so much success, that they went on to build their own church, another church in the 1920s in the boom times up on Whitney Avenue. And, Whitney Avenue. And what was built after that, I think the Baptists rented the place or owned the place for about a decade, was this bank, an Art Deco bank that is now slated for demolition, that takes its entry and takes you in to the bowels of the original church, and you can see it if you pull back. There's the church, and you probably never saw it until now. I never saw it until I saw the aerial photograph. I didn't know it was there, but it's like a husk, shroud, sarcophagus, a dead living thing, a zombie building encased in this building, which is now, basically a walking dead building. It's going to be torn down. And there's the original sanctuary. That original sanctuary then became First Federal's teller station. And that direct connection between space, form, use, surface, iconography, time, these are all lessons of the way this building was redone. And when it is demolished, if it is demolished, we're hoping maybe it's supposed to be a boutique hotel. We say, wouldn't it be great if this became a lobby? They have to park cars and do other things, so maybe that won't happen, but that's what the New England Trust does, is it actually listens to what's going on and then makes suggestions. You'll see at the end of this presentation some stuff we've actually been successful on. This will probably be destroyed, but when it's destroyed, we're hoping that we can actually see what's being destroyed before it's actually destroyed. Pull away the surfaces and see how the building was built, see what's left. Buildings may be gone, but history itself just keeps going. And I'd have one is there anybody from the, there are people here from AIA. People from AIA? Can I get an AIA? This is your moment in the sun. These wonderful people hire people to judge a competition. In judging the competition, they gave me a very important, incredibly tiny award for an interior that I did. The interior comes published, as they always get published, and a person that I don't know sends me a note from somewhere I don't remember saying, I didn't know your work was Indo-Saracenic. Indo-Saracenic, and I went, okay, got it. And then I looked it up, and there it is. So this is Indo-Saracenic architecture that I did a couple of years ago in California, and it actually relates directly to the 5 train stations in New Haven. The first one with this Indo-Saracenic 1948 Henry Austin original building that was our first train station that was around for a while, around so long that it became a market. It's a wonderful building, and you can see it here in full use with the horses, and you can see the incredible eaves. It's an amazing place. It then sort of fell into some disrepair, became a marketplace, and a new building was built. And you can see this proud mansard roof thing with this huge arcade to get on and off of the trains. And all these wonderful things lasted, I think, for less than 10, 20 years until something brutal happened, and the middle of the building got taken away. This end got added. That still stood, but the front became this kind of polyglot thing with this wing, and there's the other wing, and there's the nothing in the middle that sort of happened. That was only being around for about 30 years before a larger vision of New Haven created a new train station. This is an amazing drawing done with Cass Gilbert, and the same guy that did Central Park, Henry Law Olmsted, thought about making a great train station here, having an access to it, to a great town square that had an access to it, to those 9 squares we talked about before. And then this goes on this way. And you can see that these intentions of making great urban places that actually organize the chaos of history, of all this workers' housing, of all these things that happened, organized by great boulevards, great, terrific places, and spaces made and conspired, those things generate buildings. This is Cass Gilbert's sketch from that whole study that then made this building in 1922. And that's the train station that was in operation for all of 30 years, just 30 years before it went moribund, because a much, much better idea happened. A much, much better idea that we would have Inuro Yamasaki, who created the World Trade Tower, and a guy named Helmuth, and I forget his first name, of Helmuth, Abada, and Kasabam, designed this whole new idea for a train station that essentially made us think that wouldn't it be cool to be in this outdoor space, and we could have the New Haven train station, we could have these portals that take us down, none of this old-timey stuff. We're dealing with not 1, not 2, not 5, but like 7 St. Louis arches, and we could make this really cool place. And what really happened was they built a tunnel. And they built a tunnel that was made Penn Station look like a palace. It was essentially, I don't want to get too anatomical, but think of excretion. Basically, you end up coming out in a tube to light, and it's not a happy place. Well, that was so unhappy that they decided in the early 80s to hire Herb Newman's office to reanimate this building, to not only reanimate the building, but also to make it into something that could be usable, which meant it had to have a parking garage. And so the parking garage, as you can see, had this great arcade and had this wonderful detailing and had this nascent sort of space of promise. And of course, fulfilling the promise of the state of Connecticut last year, saying we have $60 million, let's make this next to it, which was pretty bad. But it was $60 million, and the computer program produced this drawing pretty quickly with these arches that in some way allude to something, and this stair, which is as far away as you could ever get from any train ever, so that when you drive in here, you would never use this, and you take the stair over there to get to the train over there. So, but it is actually the jewel in the crown, the focus, the Harkness Tower of that part of Connecticut. It is the truly useless, ridiculous conceit of someone that didn't know where things were going. And I said, Well, you already have an architect. Just make an urban space by making another one. Continuing the lines, making this sort of happen. Wouldn't that be nice? Wouldn't that be cool? They're going to be messing with Church Street South across the street anyway. Let's make something really interesting. Well, this afternoon, I get this. They changed it. It's all better now. Now we've got a brickish thing with an arcadey-like maybe, and then there's a thing that runs across the top like this, and some horizontal things like this, and no. So what it is this is to me, this little quartet evidences the fact that history, humans, buildings demonstrate the thought processes not only of the individuals but of our culture, of a place that actually thinks of need and also building, but also what do we love, what do we care about? And the fact that this building resulted from this building because it ignored this building because somebody did this, says people were thinking and saying no or yes or maybe. That level of active human thought is what history is. And this whole area of the town is where history is. If you take a look at this area in here across the train station, it was actually greatly thought about in the 80s and 70s. Basically, Mies van der Rohe came up with an entire scheme in front of the train station of these sort of Elysian fields of universal buildings in space. And in contrast, Charlie Moore basically said, no, I want to make something which is intricate and perspectival and actually deals with words from the Renaissance. He did 60 separate site plans to get the way this will all work out. And what happened was Church Street South housing, which was built for $22 a square foot, meaning it was going to be torn down before it was finished. It basically had almost no ability to withstand the weather, the elements, the occupancies. But it tried to do some interesting things in the perfect Pomo way. It sort of did Georgian detailing, super graphics, interesting things with the floors, colors. It did these interesting things, but in fact, it failed. The new heating plant here, the armature for some sort of entry thing, it failed. And so in failing, it's going away right now. A lot of it's gone, more's going to go away, and a market rate housing project will follow. I don't know what it will look like, but it's that level of heroism, that level of we can make things better, was manifest by Charlie Moore when he did Tower 1, because he didn't like the bulbous quality of the Knights of Columbus Tower, so he made a tower with brist corners. So they're gone. And essentially, what gave this building pungency was colored air conditioning units that actually made it an interesting place. But this ensemble of vision, of thought, of creativity, of making space, of making objects, that was transmogrified across the street to the Colosseum. And this was obviously, and this is a really hackneyed, forget, if you snore, I will not object, the horizontal to the vertical contrast, the dynamism, the idea that two parts are in collision, tension, as a huge welcoming thing to New Haven, like welcome to, on this path of Route 34 that would go on to Derby and lead us to the promised land, this beautiful Brasilia of new streets in New Haven. This reality simply didn't work for the forces mentioned before. So when it was doomed, all of people here, including Colin Kaplan, who would have been here, rallied around the idea of let's repurpose this. This is part of who we are. Let's repurpose it. And the city said, yeah, that's a good idea. Yeah, just wait a second. I got to press this button. So that ending made a new beginning for Herb Newman. Whether this happens or not, who knows? There are many things that make things happen, don't happen, but it's the reality of the creative process that allows things like this to happen behind things like this that happen. And we forget those things. We forget the presence of these things until we see them tonight. We know that they're here. I'm also going to talk to you a little bit about that. When you make an omelet, eggs are broken. So when you make an omelet and eggs are broken at Yale, Well, you want to make a good omelet, so you say, well, James Gamble Rogers made really good omelets for Yale in the mid-century. They were called Collegiate Gothic, and so Collegiate Gothic was a replication of Gothic Revival, that was a replication of Gothic architecture, and then Robert A.M. Stern himself, illegal by the way, you're not supposed to make a gargoyle of any living person, so sorry about that, created the new colleges. Now the new colleges are exactly, this is what I hope you take away too. The new colleges, and I did the math and I wrote the article, the new colleges are for the same client, the same purpose, essentially after the renovation of Morrison Styles, the same budget, the same everything. They're the same program. New and old new. Skin of concrete clad in history or Xeroxes, poured stuff that's solid all the way through. And if you wonder what places like the New Haven Preservation Trust do, that's on a tour that we did of that building, and we're giving a tour of this building in the spring, in the summer, or the fall. So if you want to know more about buildings up close and personal, become a member of this thing. This is the way you find out stuff is happening. It becomes an interesting dialogue between buildings and people. And my take on this is pretty simple. You can either worship the past and try to recreate it, or can you reject the past like Corbusier did and essentially drop a city of 3 million in the center of Paris and say, it's not the past anymore, get out. I think those two examples beggar the reality of who we are and our potential as human beings. I think we're better than that. I think we don't have to make fake fireplaces. I think fake fireplaces that are dropped into place by helicopters that have no function whatsoever are a waste, actually a moral outrage of waste. It is something that is done purely for stylistic reasons with no foundations in history except its physical form, which to me is disingenuous. To me, it's not legitimate. It basically says this building, one of the 23 that were demolished to build the colleges, this building's history and polyglot nature, that can be taken away. This building, Hammond Hall, where they did metallurgy and made a cornice that used the tools of the blacksmith to form decoration, this building should go away too because it's in the way. And this building by Roth and Moore, this building was built in 1980, should go away because it's in the way and it has some mold and it's just in the way and let's get rid of it. So what happens is, of course, they get rid of Hammond Hall. They get rid of Sealy Mud. They make a place that removes real history and presents created, instant history. History, by the way, that I confirmed in my tour that Yale allowed me to give from the people that live there, did have the added benefit of looking just like Hogwarts for the applicants. We should remember things and know things and do things with intention. Do things with intention like right now. Right now, what's going on is there are a few projects that are showing this fusion of old and new. Trinity Home was built, as Peg Chambers will tell you, Trinity Home was built over a century ago with an eleemosynary purpose of housing people that needed housing and also creating a place for them. It was created to make wonderful places, but many of them were subsumed by the Salvation Army and other projects before that. When the developer came to us, Sam Gardner came to us, the architect, we said to him, Bob said to him, I said to him, you know, you might want to think about using this chapel as a focal point of your design rather than an incidental afterthought. And they did, and they reorganized it so that they could actually keep these original bollards, renovate this space, have a dynamism with the old property. It becomes the jewel in the crown. When the developer came to us about Avalon, and the architect Beinfield talked to us, we said to him as a preservation committee, you know, you have this little building left over in Star Supply, this huge, fairly unfortunate industrial building on State Street. you have this place, why don't you use this part of it to make the building itself be more special, more interesting, fit better, actually have more value by keeping just that little bit of this large project? And they did. And it's better. The old Boathouse, another interesting, odd example that was actually used as a boathouse until somebody in the room designed a new one. Where's Turner? Anyway, somebody designed a new boathouse, and when that happened, the building, actually that was the second boathouse, the building went into being a non-boathouse in the 70s, and it ended up being just a cool building surrounded by a moat. And in fact, the cool thing is that the trust knew that this thing was going down here, it was actually going to be used elsewhere. In fact, in front of my barn in Madison, Connecticut. But what I wanted to show you was, oops, let me get, there it is. So in the tearing down of the bridge, of the Pearl Harbor Bridge, of the Q Bridge, there was money to move this building because they realized what a resource it was. It turned out to be impossible to move the building. So instead, Greg Weiss and Gardner came up with an idea to make a building that has a singular function that I find to be venerative, hopeful, and great. There was a facade or two, pieces or two that were salvageable, and they became the essential core of what this new building was to celebrate the reality of the present, the promise of the future, and the past being held by both. And in the audience today is Nancy Greenberg, and basically this building, designed in 1902, was something called the, I hope I get this name right, it was the Abner Handy House that was, as we all remember it, the Red Cross's headquarters for years. And it stood there, and these incredible pillars, this wonderful stuff, and it was reviewed by the trust as being a significant building, and it had this sort of odd postmodernist wing added onto the back in the 80s. And basically, the new development, which will increase the density, provide housing, brings this lost facade back with the work of Fernando Pastor into becoming functional again and bringing back many of the elements that were there before. And the new buildings designed by Peter Gluck out of New York City carry on the nature of the street. Now, this was all proposed to us or talked to us at the Trust as, what do you think of this? This ended up getting a lot smaller because of, I think, of our help in the input, because the truth is, this is totally in scale with the whole street. And the developer and the architect listened and thought and made a product which is new, different, but not without history, following the reality that life changes, streetscapes change, but things in the street and of the community should be preserved, kept, and enhanced. And this project does that. Most recently, and I'll close with this, of course, is Marcel Breuer's Pirelli Building, Armstrong Rubber Building, that was bought by IKEA and had its tail bobbed and became basically a thing. Basically a just demolition by neglect thing that was hanging on until several people, especially Matt Nemerson and a few other people, fought like crazy to show, and including the Trust, to show the value of this building in our culture, to show that there is something more important than just money. There's something called value. And style is not about history. History is about value. So in recreating this building, they're following through on the hopes of all of us. An architect, a single person architect 5 years ago made this paper project and presented it just to draw attention to his office with no client, no potential, but he said, this manifests the human spirit in a way that should be reanimated in the IDEA Hotel at IKEA, get it? And the bottom line is that spirit of past, present, and future, that idea that history is just as tangible as gravity, will be the next lecture that I give up at the University of Hartford. And the idea that we can absorb the fact of this and the fact of history simultaneously, to me, is the promise of our collective future as a culture. So thank you. Thank you for coming. Rather than bore everybody with lots of questions and all the rest, I would just say if you want to talk about tonight, I'm here. Otherwise, eat. There's still food. There's a lot of booze over there. Please eat and drink. And thank you for coming and join the Trust.